Hey guys, it's Thorin, also known as 944. Don't forget Thorin's YouTube channel.
Right, so premise goes, I got like 7 new flavours from Gamer Supps that I hadn't tried before. So I had someone else agree that each day I do a stream, they make me a separate one. And I don't know which flavour it is. They put it into this bottle and then they put whatever the flavour is into this bag here. I haven't opened it. Again, you could choose to disbelieve me and call me a liar. Who gives a fuck? So they put it into this flavour. And what I do is I try the flavour. I then look at the names. I've already obviously eliminated 3 names. I try to guess just based on the name which Gamer Supps flavour would it be. Then I look on the website and I actually look up what flavour is it and then what is the description of that flavour. So I think it's a pretty good concept. It's also fun, isn't it? So my choices for today's, it can be Sakura Splash GG by Silvervale, Raw Meat, whatever that is, Incel Tears, whatever that is, or Pom Pom Punch GG by Gloomy Bear. Now, the reason I said earlier, let's see if I get it wrong 3 times. I've guessed the Pom Pom Punch one a bunch of times for anything that was vaguely red. So let's see if I get owned on that one. Let's see. Oh, that smells good. Oh, that's actually quite a nice flavour. That's certainly some sort of a berry. It's hard to tell what, though. That's why I'm so scared. The other one I might get wrong is I might just say it's... Because it's that fruit punch. I don't really know if I'd say that's fruit punch. Maybe I'm going to go for that Sakura GG, Splash one or whatever. I'm not really sure what Sakura is. Is it some sort of Japanese berry type flavour? So I don't know. I'm going to say Sakura Splash GG. That was the flavour, right? Yes, by Silvervale. Let me see then if I was indeed correct. Is that in fact the flavour? What is today's flavour? I've been actually owned, boys. Even though I've guessed Pom Pom Punch 3 times in a row, I was wrong on all of those ones. So now it was right, of course. So, right, it looks like that's strange because, as far as I can tell, isn't it implied that that's supposed to be pomegranate based on that? Okay, that's quite interesting. I mean, it doesn't particularly taste like pomegranate to me. It just tastes nice. Just it tastes like a very pleasant sort of red berry flavour. Like, again, nothing sharp or tart about it. It's just got a really smooth flavour. It's actually delicious. Like, it's actually really, really nice. It's actually the sort of flavour, these sorts of flavours are the sort that if you have like a kid, this is the sort of cordial that they will actually like because it isn't insanely sugary. It just has a pleasant taste. Obviously, it has fuck all sugar in this because it's Gamer Supps, isn't it? So it's got 0 sugar in it. It has like less than 1 calorie per serving if people don't know. Good for keto friendly. By the way, the sweetener is also excellent. I don't get any of those digestive problems that people tend to get from different sweeteners. Like I have certain ones, I won't say which, that actually wreck me. Just they either give me like digestive issues or they just taste really bad. There's actually one type of a sweetener, I won't say which, that actually gives me like a mild headache. But not with Gamer Supps, actually. I never ever get that experience, I've noticed. So shout out to them. Turns out it was Pom Pom Punch. Then we've got, this is going to be Team 9 when they won ESWC 2003. Oh, by the way, I didn't do this one here. So Rambo, unsurprisingly, was the MVP of that one. He was actually fucking insane. Let me just quickly check the other stats. Interesting detail is, he was far and away the best. Like, he had like a 0.93 KPR. Then you go down to like K-Sharp, Moto, and Steel were all like pretty good 0.7 type players. Bullseye, amazingly, was actually the 2nd highest ranked. He must have had an amazing tournament here. And Kane actually did quite poorly, I've got to say. By the way, he didn't play for much longer after this. He had some shit that went on outside of the server that got him fired from his job, basically. And interestingly enough, when you go and look, I've already made that point previously. Actually, in the upper bracket final, it was even Steel that carried the game. That was the Inferno one, if people remember. Against SK, interesting detail. It was actually Rambo and K-Sharp that went off in sort of the proposed X3 NIP rematch, which was SK against 3D with similar cause. So Team 9 that won that tournament. Let me think. ESWC 2003. I've actually realised I'm barely going to get through this, but we'll just do what we do. We'll edit it all together later. It's all good. It's all good, boys. Right, so the Team 9 squad was interesting because this is where Veslin's been messing with the lineups, but he's finally arrived at like the real lineup for a while. If you remember what happened is after NIP at the end of 2001, Veslin left the team when they won the CPL. I think it was something like they refused to pay him for like a flight he'd used or some bullshit like that. He basically went, at the time he had his pick of the teams. I can tell you he was trialling with Game Online. I even have some secret POVs where he was playing with them in scrims. He was a friend of mine. He was also trialling with Nordic Division and he had all these choices because he was in the best best team in the world. Everyone wanted this guy as their RGL. Now, he actually chose, rather than Game Online, which is the more skilled lineup, he actually chose to go to Nordic Division, which was sort of like another... It's a bit like what Moto did with TSO. It's like a friends team of like skilled players with loads of them, and they play all the clan-based games. And it's more like the early days where you just play because it's fun. And I think he took that team because he knew he could then take it over and mould it and bring people in and out and test who's legit and eventually make a top team. So he started doing that. And initially, he just tried using stars. He kept the people with the big names like Swift and Venom and these players. These were the big names of the team at the time. These are the ones he kept around. And then he tried to bring in, he brought in Execute at the time, wasn't in NIP. Later would go back to SK. He brought in Dark, who was like this amazing fucking talent from the Norwegian team. He started making these lineups. The problem was that at this particular era, like, he couldn't keep hold of those players. Executor went back to Eaton and Potty and took Dark with him. Then you had the situation where, like, Venom and Swift sort of didn't hold up in terms of either attitude or, like, nerves on LAN. And so Vessler went out there and he started looking for people to recruit. And what he did was he took a bunch of talents. If you remember, he took Luke, who was the famous player who played in Neolithic. There's a Norwegian player. He didn't get to survive much beyond Click Arena. He took Luciano and Lucchese, played in the IDDQD team with Smurfer and Bengen and those people. The previous year, he took Quick, who'd been in R Lager, who'd won the World Cyber Games qualifier, and then he got Executor back because Executor got kicked out of SK because they wanted to have Swedish players to attend World Cyber Games. So if you look at this lineup, right, Vestlin is a traditional AWPer, but mainly an IGL, and people aren't going to think of him as a big fragger, but I think you'll be surprised. Executor is still a monster at this time. Maybe his overall raw abilities dropping a little bit because the game is a bit more nerfed than 1 or 2 years earlier when he was in NIP. Luciano, for me, was just a solid player who had a good head on his shoulders. Lucchese and Vessler at the time told me he thought he was the best rifler in the world. I think he's a very talented player who could have done much, much more. Quick was actually a quite skilled AWPer. It's just because he was like... with this group that were friends, people thought they're not serious. He was someone who very quickly pivoted, came to this team, became one of the best players. So I always thought this was actually quite an underrated lineup. It's got a nice mix of skill, good personalities, veterans, investor and executor. You picked up some interesting up-and-comers in Luciano, Lucchese and Quick. And in Lucchese and Quick, you've managed to get one of the better AWPers and one of the best raw riflers in the world. So unsurprisingly, this team, which played heavily tactical style, mega at using the abusive exploit in the economy, by the way, where you save out T-side and just keep crippling the CT economy, and had real playbooks even back in 2003. Interesting detail. Veslin, according to this, would be the unofficial MVP of that major, which is crazy because people in this era think Veslin's not that skilled. He was actually quite a skilled player. He's just the guy putting a lot of his effort into the actual tactics, etc. And I can tell you at this tournament that after Veslin, it's actually Executor who did really well. So, interestingly, it's actually the older guys, the more established guys who were carrying this one. Then lastly, you have M19 who won World Cyber Games 2002, where, as I said, they basically did nothing before or after that. So if I look that up really quickly, I'm not even going to be aware of who these players are, though, I've got to say. Like, I actually only vaguely remember them. Like, these two, unsurprisingly, who have the names, are the most famous ones. Like, this guy was probably the best known. I think people said he was the star back then, but I guess he was the MVP. This guy, I think, was the in-game leader, but I'm not sure. And then the others, I just don't even remember. Like, they just weren't famous players. That's why they don't even have a page. So if we go to World Cyber, there's not even anyone listed. I wonder what happens if I look in my document. Actually, based on this document, but to be fair, he only had... that's why. It's because he only had a couple of the games. He didn't get most of the other games. So based on the data I have, it's either Nook or Calibla. It's about like Kalich, I think that would be. Yes, I think you would say Kalich or something for that name. I think that's how you pronounce it. They would be the stars. By the way, some of the players who won this tournament, like Madfad and Rado, don't even have good stats. It's actually insane. I guess it's only for a few maps, though, to be fair, so who can really know, right? The Kalibich guy did carry the game against Nerve, though, but it could be the group stage game. Again, it's incomplete data when you go back this far, surprisingly. I don't know enough about those other players, but now let's look at some of the other people. So now let's go. We're going to keep going in order. So this is obviously SK, and it's got Brunk because there's a fat guy there on that part. So let me just quickly look up which tournament is this from SK. This is when they won CPL Summer 2003, which they won without dropping a map. So let's go to CPL Summer 2003. Right, so this is a team that had Potty and Heaton, as I've said earlier, were still pretty good players, but they were slightly on the downslope from being the absolute best players. Arl was good, but like more of a fill player. I've already done this lineup basically, but the key thing is they had Brunk as their AWPer, and he was more of like, for me, he was just like a steady AWPer. He wasn't a superstar. He wasn't bad. He had like kind of a silly personality in the Fisker kind of way that people enjoy. I thought he was like a decent player, but for me also, I did think his time was limited on this squad. Like, since Heaton and Potty aren't quite the players they used to be, I think you were never going to survive long as an AWPer unless you're the absolute cracked out best AWPer. And spoiler, they used to play with Hib, who's really fucking insane. So for me, Brunk, his time was always numbered. He was the one who got bumped off later for Spawn, who, by the way, meant you didn't have a traditional AWPer, but Spawn can fuck around a secondary AWPer as good as anyone in the world. At this tournament, you did do very, very, very well. This is the one where you beat this team easily. It's an NA team from Cal Invite level. There's another Cal Invite team you're absolutely smashing. You play another Cal Invite team. Admittedly, this isn't a very good one. It's actually insane you've drawn them here, but it's because somehow MIBR's team's gotten upset by Tau from Texas. So you beat them easily enough. I'll just go along here. Then you go to play Team 9, which is Veston's team that's just won ESWC. You beat them fairly easily, actually. And it's just a championship map, Nuke. One of your close games is the upper bracket final on Inferno against 3D, who had a really great game against you. I think they were even in a position to potentially win, but you had the clutches. And then in the final, you played Team 9. Just 2 this time was the finals map. This is when they changed in 2003 from Nuke from the previous year. And you actually handled them. So realistically, you only had one close game. And even then it was 13-10. Aside from that, you're just murking everyone. You didn't lose once. I think this has to be one of the most impressive runs ever, especially because Team 9 were the ESWC champions. You beat them twice easily. 3D, admittedly, this is when they'd kicked out Kane, but they still had Steele in there. They're the reigning champions of the CPL, and you've beaten them. And yeah, the other teams aren't that good, but no one else good got to place here. So I think that's got to actually go fairly high up. Like, the lineup itself isn't insane. Like, that's an A for the moment. I think what's going to end up happening is there's going to be a lot that are an A, and I'm going to bump a couple down and a couple up, depending on how it goes at the end. Then we have, what is that? It looks like MTW from 2008, maybe, is it? Oh, right, it's the Titans winning ESWC 2004. Right, there you go. So, right, the problem there, I think, is going to be that you didn't really play that many insane teams that time around because you got to skip them and the format was a little bit scuffed. So if we look at that, the Titans, this was obviously where this was their breakout event, if people don't remember. This is where Wimp was, I think, only 16. He's fucking insane, but he obviously can't play at CPLs because of that. He was already mental at this one time. For me, Drally was like a really good hybrid player. I remember him more as an AWPer because even people like Shagwright used to tell me he's one of the best AWPers, but he's more of a hybrid player because KK was their main AWPer. By the way, as an IGL, KK, pretty skilled IGL actually. Then as your role players, you've got Eugene and Eraz. So it's actually quite, if you don't know, this is actually the original model for like how Danish CS is played. Yeah, you can go back to SOA and Level and those teams. They had like good players, they had roles and stuff. But this is when you're doing proper tactics, you're taking lesser players who have the right mentality or can fit the role. You have like history that goes back years and years. So you have great communication and team play, not big egos. And then you have your stars in people like Wimp and Drally, and then even KK is like kind of a solid fragger that you can get the damage done. So this was like a very good team. Sadly, obviously at the CPLs, they couldn't use Wimp. They had to bring in Spinksy, who, by the way, himself was a talented player from the early years, a very good all-around talent, but just they weren't as good. So at the 2 events they did get to use this lineup at, they won this one, ESWC Image, and at the World Cyber Games, they narrowly lost to 3D and came second and got silver medal. So this was actually, in this era, one of the better, like, tactical, but also some firepower teams, but also, crucially, uses the modern understanding that you can have non-star players in the lineup. You can just have good role players that round out the squad and play off chemistry. In this tournament itself, this is only the second ESWC. It was a massive shock, but the 2 teams made the finals. The Titans from Denmark, and then the bigger shock was Spixel with Bullen and Valle. Like, they weren't even anyone before this year, but they made this massive rise from the Spixel Land Cafe and made it all the way to the final. So Titans were able to beat Ornage, who I'm going to guess is from like Denmark at the time, or Sweden. Which one is it? I know they were a Swedish team typically. Oh, it was actually the one that had Megaton, Spawn's brother, Magix, who's actually Jumpy's brother, if you don't know. Zad was probably the most famous player here. So they beat Ornage in the group stage. Aside from that, these aren't relevant teams. Then you go to the second group stage, because it used to be 2 round robins in ESWC at this era. Like, you beat Adrenaline, Astralis, and Cyber Team. Right. So Astralis was themselves on the rise. There's a bunch of talented players from Finland, and they did all right at this tournament, actually. The Cyber Team was just some team from Czech Republic no one knows. And then the other team you beat was Adrenaline, who was actually one of the favourites potentially for this tournament. Because if you look at this lineup, this is where Vesseland's moved to like coach role. They've kept Executor, one of the best players in the world. Kept Notorious, who was very good in the previous Adrenaline, was awesome in Game Online a few years, just a mega land player. Quick, you've retained, who's a very good player. Lucchesi, you've kept as one of your best. You brought in Snyden to be your IGL and scout. This on paper, I've heard this team was smurfing for this tournament, and people thought this could be, because they had proper sponsors, like the next generation of Adrenaline. Without Vesseland, he could be a coach figure now. They swapped to this lineup. It's a really good lineup on paper. So actually to win against them is pretty legit. And Astralis, you're beating them all. You're actually smashing Adrenaline. Then you go to the playoffs. So you play against Mouse Spots in the first round. Now, Mouse Spots in this era, by the way, has one of their super teams. Like, this is actually one of the best teams ever from Germany/Austria. This is a mega lineup of players. These are all stars from different lineups over the years. So that's actually a very legit team to destroy like that. The problem for Titans already is they're not going to get to be number one because of the run they had in the playoffs. Like, on paper, they're supposed to then play SK Gaming, who don't have Element, but they're still an extremely good team. Unfortunately, SK Gaming got upset by the all-Russian Virtus Pro team. So you play Virtus Pro, not very experienced, and just beat them on Dust 2. A map they just beat SK on, by the way, so you even got to see them play that map. It's also a BO1 single elim format. In the final, you play Spixel. Right, on paper, that could have been Adrenaline. That could have been TSG. The lineup with, like, fucking Sunman and Volcano and those guys. Dominator. Pretty solid team. Instead, it was Spixel, who, look, Valley and Bullen go on to be legendary players. Some of the other players you've never heard of from Spixel. Like, who here knew I like Hyber and Crypt? Unless you're really old school, you didn't. So, unfortunately, it's just the teams you play that make it not as sick. Like, but I do think the Titans themselves was a very good team. So I think for this one, I'm maybe going to put it B for now. And I'm going to think about that later. I've just realised, my alarm's going to go off in 4 minutes. It's all good. We'll keep going. Right, this is who? Who is this winning? Right, this is actually Eyeballers winning CPL Summer 2004. So if we go to... I can realise we're going to have another session to finish this, but it's all good. It's fun to do as well, by the way. I actually enjoy it. Now, this is when Eyeballers, crucially, the main thing they did is the last year, if you remember, in the latter half of the previous year, right, in the first half of 2003, it was Team 9 who was the main competitor to SK to be the world champions and the second best Swedish team and all that jazz. After that, in 2004, in the latter part of 2003, it was then this squad where before they were called Eyeballs, they were called things like Team AMD or whatever, some shit like that. And basically, they were a lineup of friends again. People like Vilden, Archie, Gooden. These guys have played together for years and years. You got Iskal, who, if you remember, later on did go on to be like with Forrest and Robban and those guys in Big Rip in WEG the following year. But this was when he came in as a stand-in to replace... I forget who it was who couldn't play this tournament. Who was it who was missing? Because someone had to skip the tournament and that guy came in as a stand-in. So let's go and look at a past one from them. I'll go and look. It's when they're not called Eyeballers. Let's go and look on this maybe. See, but I don't think it was Bever that you were replacing this. I forget anyway. But anyway, he came as a stand-in last minute for someone, I forget. But basically in this team, what you had was, Hyper was a very skilled player. He was like one of the true stars. By the way, he should have kept playing. He quit the next year, but he should have played for 4 or 5 years long. He was a very talented player. Could do a little bit of calling, element style, but was also a monster star player. Vilden, like I say, was the Stratbook IGL and your AWPer. Not the best AWPer, but a very solid, above average AWPer. Gooden was like a role player. Archie was like an all-around player for me. He had good skills. He had aggressive attitude. He was just like an all-round third star type player. Iskal, in this case, later on he becomes an IGL. I'm actually not sure what role he played. I think he actually fragged in this tournament. And amazingly, they won the tournament. They actually beat SK, even though SK has an amazing lineup. You have a bunch of good teams here at this tournament. But not one of the more skilled lads in history, in my opinion. It's mainly about Hyper, a bit of Archie, Vilden if he has the AWP. Aside from that, it's more of like a team player team. It's like traditional Swedish playoff team player, good comms, people having their head on their shoulders. No big egos in this team generally, except maybe Hyper and Vilden. When you go to the tournament itself, you will see they start around the middle. So they beat Alternate Attacks, smashed them. They beat Team 3D. This is in 2004, so Team 3D on paper is supposed to still be good. They beat Mouse Sports. This is when Mouse Sports has an insane lineup, like I said earlier. Beat them very easily. Bizarrely, you end up playing Death is Eternal, an NA team from fucking SoCal. You smash them easily as well. After this, I'll do the Q&A. Then you play SK in the upper bracket final. You actually comfortably beat them on Dust 2, the old championship match. In the final, you play Inferno, and you very easily beat SK. So I have to say, this is one of the more dominant runs. But SK, those are good games to play. Who else? Mouse is a good game to play. 3Ds. It's actually a pretty good run, I've got to say. It's not remembered as one of the greatest runs. It's not one of the greatest teams of all time. But that's actually a pretty good run, I've got to say. Like, I feel like for the moment, the problem is the team itself isn't that crazy. I feel like for the moment I'll put it B, but I'm really considering it should maybe be an A. It's just the team not being that crazy makes me put it in B, and the fact it was a stand-in A scout, wasn't like the real lineup. So I'm going to put it B for now, but I'll really consider putting that A and putting something else down potentially. I'm just going to go in order of these, because the other downside is it's hard to tell who they are, so sometimes I go and check. I'm going to do all these, and at the end we're going to double check all the tiers and see if there's any different tier I need to put out there. So, right. So this, I can actually tell this one very easily because it says WEG on the wall. This is NOA, the lineup that had won CPL Winter 2004, where SK didn't attend. So admittedly, it wasn't every top team there, but they did beat the eyeball of super team of Bolin and Valley, who was really good, and Gamer Core Rival or whatever. And this is where they won the first ever season of World Esports Games. WEG in, this first one was in Korea, actually. And this is the one where they had the real lineup with Element and Method and all those guys. And they went there and they won the first season. Admittedly, it was fairly easy because if you don't, well, I'll get into this in a second. Actually, why am I saying all this shit now? Why don't I just fucking go and show you? So let's see. There we go. WEG 2005, season 1. This was the last tournament this lineup ever played together, by the way, because after this, famously, Element left and initially went to Four Kings and fucked the lineup up. And that's where that story, if you saw my Fisker interview, it was going to be Fisker that came in, but then in the end, he couldn't attend for whatever reasons. And so instead, it was Quick, the former AWPA of Vesseland's teams who came and played there. But sadly, that team did terribly and came last place at the LAN. Right, so this was the team that was the CPL champions. Now, I can tell you some interesting info about this team, which is, I'm not that surprised that even after they won this event, they split up, because there's a few reasons. One, I actually was friends with some of the people in this team, and so as a result, I actually happened to know that when they'd made their roster moves in the latter part of the previous year, where they'd kicked out Knoxville, one of the founding members, and basically through moves, it had gotten so that they'd got an Executor in, who, by the way, wasn't going to play with someone like Knoxville. And then they had this sick-looking lineup like this. What they were able to do was they were having issues though with the lineup though and the future of the lineup, because it was this crazy project where you took European players and North American players. And so I actually happen to know if they hadn't have probably even won CPL Winter, if they'd have even just had a tall dodgy result, they probably would have broke the team up immediately then. So they didn't, because they won, and then they went to this tournament. The problem with this tournament is though, it lasted a fucking, look at this, it lasts just under 2 months. And so because it was just under 2 months long, this is the eras when CPLs are 3 days long. You just fly there. The rest of the time, by the way, you're not even with your team. You're at home, wherever you live. Shagwire in Canada, Method in fucking LA. I mean, at this point, maybe Method was living with Shagwire in LA or something while they were doing things in America. I don't know. Obviously, the Europeans were over in Norway, etc. So at the time, I always said these tournaments killed fucking teams, because if you were ones where you could get along when you only had to meet up for a few days, being locked in a room with someone for a month and a half is like a steel cage death match. You're never going to fucking handle it. Anyone who's ever roomed with someone early on in life when you're all immature, you'll know it can be a fucking nightmare. So unfortunately, this lineup was never going to last a long time. It was truly one of the best lineups in history though, because first of all, I know they couldn't practice much because they used to literally live on different continents. So when they got together and they boot camped, they really got a lot out of that. And they had a really interesting mix of players on the team, because if you look at this team, this is already 2005, by the way. Element isn't quite as good as he was 2 years, 3 years earlier, but he's still a really good player. And when he locks his mind in, he's definitely one of the best, intuitive callers mid-round and between rounds in the game. Nikon was just your ultimate sort of, I would compare him to a Magisk. He's the guy where they just do dirty sort of jobs in the game, but they're a super rock, anchor type CT player who could just take out everyone. No big ego to get in everyone's way. just a soldier, basically. Not the most skilled player, but skilled player. Executor, I've mentioned this in the past, he also, like, way past his prime at this point in time. Executor's prime sort of like 2001 to 2002 or something, or 2003. Like, this is when Executor is a genius tactician. It really learned a lot from Veslin and leveled his game up in that regard. And at this era, he's the guy who designs your playbook, wins you a few clutches, but isn't like the best player in the team. Method is probably the most skilled player on the lineup, one of the best mechanical players ever, but was a bit of a ditz, actually, in terms of his brain. I mean, famously in this team, they supposedly banned him from using nades because he was just fucking doing too much team damage, even though he's one of the best players in the world. He's a guy who just kind of like just focused on the crosshair. And then Jaguar was obviously like your up-tempo guy who has like a big attitude and personality and is a jokester, but by the way, that could annoy people. And was a very skilled AWPer, but also I thought had times where, I mean, I actually know this for a fact, I was friends with him too. He had motivation that waned, it went in and out. So when his motivation waned, he wasn't practicing as much. And he was a very skilled player, but when you're skilled but you don't practice as much, your game's going to get a bit more rusty. It's why I always say this was the end of his prime for me, because when he went to Team 3D, I'm sorry, I think actually he got complacent because that was a lineup that didn't have the same sort of ambition. A lot of them were just collecting a check and hadn't had many big results in years. And I just think he wasn't as inspired. Whereas at this point, they were living by the seat of their pants at this point. They knew they're like the sponsor money, is it coming in? Supposedly the guy who was one of their like managers stole some of the money with Element, people claim, and they never even got the prize money from this tournament or CPL, I've heard. So there was all sorts of shenanigans. Obviously, they're using players from different continents. So it was a great project. It was a very skilled lineup. It's an interesting mix of players. Think about it. You've got sort of like the genius lurk type player who's the IGL. You've got the sick anchor player. You've got the, I mean, Execute sort of an all-round player, but you've got like a super sick land player who's clutch, etc., and could come in late and around, but also call strats and design strats. You've got an insane aggressive rifler who can also pick up an AWP if he needs to. And then you've got one of the best AWPers of all time. He's just an all-around talent in the game generally. It also like balances out the fact that like Nikon and Method are quite quiet people. Element and Executor have massive personalities and opinions. And then Jaguar's just Jaguar, isn't he? So this is an all-time great team. But the event was fairly easy to win. And the reason why is because you had to go for a month and a half. Actually, a whole bunch of the teams just never went or didn't send good lineups. It wasn't until much later WEG seasons that all the best teams started to go. In the first season, a bunch of people turned the invite down because of school or work, or they just couldn't go for almost 2 months. So you have, for example, like 4 Kings in this scenario is like 3 Swedes and 2 British players. Like 4 Kings isn't a top team at this point in time. Like, this isn't the era when they had like people like later Natu and some of the. This is when they're in the era where they just have like decent players still, but like they're more like a team that had come like 9th at CPL or 8th or something. Mouse Sports sadly couldn't take their real lineup. This year, you might remember, they were one of the teams of the year. Later in the year, they won CPL Spain, Barcelona. They were like what? Top 4 at ESWC. They were one of the best teams of the year. The problem here is, though, you have Pabst, aka Pope, very good player. You have Blizzard, very good player, captain. You have Neo, one of the best players. But then you have Toddy. Who the fuck is that exactly? You don't even know. Just a German player. Basically, the problem was, as far as I know, Goh, probably their best player, couldn't attend. And then I think the other player who couldn't attend based on these names would probably be, I think, Roman R. I think I'm going to say based on this lineup. So what they actually had to do was Moses' brother, Hare, from fucking America, who doesn't speak a word of German, by the way, had to go because they asked a bunch of European players, can you come and fill in for Mouse? He had to go and stand in for Mouse Sports. He used to be the IGL of a fucking American team, and I can tell you, they gave him like flashcards for spots on like the maps in German. But you can imagine, German teams are like German football, it's like super tactical and structured. How are you going to do all that if the guy can't speak English? And his original role was IGL, so it's one of those ones where that's another lineup. Like on paper, Mouse Sports should have been one of the major contenders, and they did come 3rd here, but it's not that great a lineup. Like if you took these teams to a European land, like no NOA could win it, none of these teams could. Like 4 Kings isn't even that good a squad. Gamercore at the CPLs was amazing. They were one of the teams contending at away. At this one, not really. Because look, you've got Fear, one of the better players, the in-game leader. You've got Exodus, sort of your fill player, good spray guy. You've got Haynes, maybe the more skilled player in the team, really good like hybrid player. You've got Masternook, like heart of the teams. But the problem is, who the fuck's Medrano? Medrano was just their mate and an old school player, wasn't anywhere near their level. They couldn't take Media, so I did my reflection. And Medias, by the way, was like their clutch match player and one of their best land players. So the lineup wasn't very good. I've heard this one was an absolute steel cage death match and ripped the whole fucking squad apart. So unsurprisingly, they came fourth. And you look elsewhere, at the time, funny thing is, later in this year, two of these teams would become very good. Maven Crew, as you can see with Solo, basically becomes that Korean team that you know later. And then WNV, with different lineups, admittedly, eventually becomes a champion in this tournament. At the time, these teams were nobody, though. Like, these teams were all considered somewhat shit. Now, Maven Crew, admittedly, the previous year in World Cyber Games in Condition Zero, their lineup had actually stolen the bronze medal away from SK of Hyper and Potty and Heaton and those guys, like the SK Super team. So they weren't total nobodies, but this is before, remember, we even had the Lunatic High Rise. That's later in this year with CPL Winter. So at the time, actually, Asian CS is considered something of a joke. By the way, if you don't know, Maven Crew here is, even though you can't recognise most of them because it's mainly just Solo, they're some of the people who later became the Project KR/Estro/We Made Fox. Meanwhile, Flux over here are the people who became Lunatic High. That's why you've got Bebe and Mal and Clipper and these guys who are obviously, it doesn't have Enemy and Glow and some of the others, but these were the guys in Lunatic High. So unfortunately, this tournament wasn't very hard to win. And if you go and see here, in the group stage, which lasted fucking forever and was televised in Korea, they lost to Four Kings very narrowly. But aside from that, it's whatever. Then in the second group phase, they lost one game, it looks like. They lost to... Oh, I'm looking at the wrong one here. They... 5-0-1. Who did they lose to? I don't really know what the one is for, because you didn't lose to anyone here. What am I missing? You didn't lose to anyone. Who knows? Maybe I think what happened here is you actually played like double round robin, but they've only included one set of results, if you know what I mean. I would suspect something like that. Who knows who they lost to? Based on this, I'm going to guess Gamer Core, but who else could it even be? Then in the playoffs, you easily beat Mouse Sports, and in the final, it's even worse, because by the time they got to the playoffs, right, see here that it lists Akuji. I'm pretty sure that at one point, I know this story, that Harriman, the longtime player of Four Kings with Manji Capta, was in this team, but he actually went home partway through the event before the playoffs, even though, by the way, as they did, winning the prize money was massive prize money, because he actually said some whingy little bitch shit, like, oh, I'm homesick and I miss, he literally said something like, I miss ketchup and sausage butties or something like, which is like sausage sandwiches, like, you fucking child. I always thought that guy was a wanker, by the way, in the UK scene. If you knew this guy, he had one of the shittiest, biggest attitudes ever, and he acted like he was Spawn, but he was just a good UK player, mate. He wasn't some fucking god. Meanwhile, his mate sat next to him, Maggie Kaplan, was fucking insane generational talent, so fuck that guy. Akuji was a good player, obviously he was a Four Kings player years later anyway. By the way, Goodfellow was mega. Just the red guy was a whatever player, wasn't he? And I've also heard the Harriman guy was an absolute prick to people like Snyden and, well, I won't go into more than that, but I've said with Snyden, basically, I think he just punched him in the face at an event or something insane like that, something actually fucking insane. So that guy can suck dick forever, by the way. Don't give a flying fuck. So this event actually wasn't a very hard one to win. I've also just realised, you know what? I'll leave this in here because it was actually a mega breakdown. But do you know what's annoying? I've just realised. The reason why this picture says WEG, and I've just done that whole thing about WEG, is because there just isn't actually a picture of this lineup, if you Google, where they were winning CPL Winter. Because if you ever go and look, I think people like Fragbite didn't attend on their own, so they were like, back in the early days, there wasn't actually great photo galleries. So sadly, I've done that whole breakdown and realised WEG wasn't a fucking major, was it? Like, this is obviously supposed to be for CPL Winter, so it's all good. I did just waste everyone's time there, but that'll just be free. We'll just give that as a free piece of trivia. Free, irrelevant CS history lesson there. So I said earlier, they would have broken up if they didn't win this LAN, as far as I know, because I'll show you some of the results before. This was where, when they'd got an element, they went to ESWC. They got an element from SK, remember, who'd had the best year like ever the year before. They bombed the ESWC, basically. They won this Everland tournament that was basically just like EG and fucking United 5 and Team 3. It was just NA teams. At CPL, they also bombed. This is where they came 9th to 12th. By the way, that's insane for players like Executor, Element. They're not used to that sort of like low placing. Then they got, I think this is when Executor stood in and they used like Mini Valley or something mental like that. Did they? No, this is when Knoxville was still there. That's right. This is when Nikon went out the lineup briefly. Because he couldn't attend this LAN, I think, in Norway. Executor came in, but he was just standing in at the time. And they've actually got Al, who was mates with Element, obviously from SK, to come and stand in as well. And they came second or whatever. Yeah, they came second to Valle's Spixel team with Bullen. And then after that, They came fourth at the Nol-Elva LAN, which I also think they had a stand-in for. Let me just double check that. Where is it? No, this is when they got the real lineup. That's right. This is when they made the real lineup, and I think Execute maybe officially joined. They only came fourth at this LAN, believe it or not. But like, there's a big shock, obviously, with this team. That not the Draken you're thinking of. This is a different player. Where this team shocked everyone and blew everyone's minds out of nowhere. It's just like semi-pros. They beat out a whole bunch of top teams that came second at this LAN, only beaten by the SK with Hyper, who obviously would later become NIP the following year. So going into the CPL, the key detail was that there was no SK who just won the Nol-Elva. So that meant that this tournament was wide open. So the teams everyone was scared about was, NOA was on the map, but no one knew yet how good would this lineup be. Eyeballers looked terrifying, and I heard a rumour in Europe they were just killing everyone in scrims. Because what they did is they took Valet and Bullen from the Spixel team that come second at ESWC. These were really skilled players. Like Bullen was like a really skilled rifler, with like more on the aggressive side. Valet was an amazing AWPer, had IGL skills, all-around game. You've seen the frag movies of him. Archie, I've mentioned on the past one, was like a skilled all-arounder. Filden was like an AWPer, but more of the set-style AWPer, and Guden was like a fill-type player. So I always thought on paper this was an amazing construction of a roster. Like the skill here, the tactics, you've got some of the core remaining of Filden, Archie, Guden. You've got Valet and Bullet even played together. On paper, this team was probably supposed to win this major. They obviously didn't. They came second. Gamer Core was insane at this point in time. This is when they had already come third at the CPL Summer previously, barely losing to SK there. Big Grip. This was the one where Iskal had been the stand-in for Eyeballers, if you remember, when they won the previous CPL. But since at the time Hyper had left to SK, they'd done the rebuild. Iskal was just a stand-in, wasn't ever a full-time player. He then went and was the in-game leader of this team. Or maybe he wasn't in-game leader, actually, because they've got Khan. So this was the team that had Khan and DSN, who'd played together a little bit before this. Zad was just like a solid rifler, similar with the Kalipo guy. That's like not a bad team. You'd expect them to be top 8. I mean, obviously did finish top 8. Call, this is actually the first tournament they had their breakout when they finished 5th here. When they shocked the world with this lineup, everyone thought they were going to bomb. The Titans had obviously won ESWC and come second at World Cyber Games, but this is where they couldn't take Wimp, their best player, so their lineup was a bit capped, and they just came 5th at these lands. Or was it actually like 7th or something? Let me see. Was it? No, it was 5th. It was 6th. There you go, 6th. Death is Eternal was just like a very good team, but not as good as Gamer Corp from the West Coast. And Team 3D obviously had all these superstar names, but at this point in time, aside from World Cyber Games and Condition Zero, weren't having big results at lands. So if you go and look at this one, NOA actually they actually even got like a dodgy ass seed. So they were around here. They weren't even like a first or second seed. They were around here. They started easy win there. They barely beat Mibr, but I will say this is one of the years when Kogu was fucking insane in Mibr. So that was actually a really epic game on Mill. Then they famously lost to Eyeballers on Nuke, but a key detail here, they didn't really lose that game. As you can see, they started on T side, and what happened was either Element or Shagwar, I think it was Shagwar, threw the famous flashbang, the notorious flashbang at the ramp on Nuke, that if it goes under the box, there's a spot where it could get stuck and it basically affect the skybox of the whole ramp room and blind everyone. And so because it would blind everyone, it was basically like an exploit. They could have just fucking fixed this map years earlier. The rule at CPLs was to make people not do it. If you do it, even accidentally, well, you just forfeit all the rest of the rounds of the half. So I think, no joke, it was something like, let's say like 5 or 6 rounds into the game, and Jaguar, I think it was, did that fucking flash, and then basically that meant, right, Eyeballers just wins the half 10-5 as a result. So they basically almost entered the game just off that. But it meant that they went to the lower bracket and famously became the only team in history at the time at the CPLs to win from the lower bracket. So what they did is they go to the lower bracket, they play against the team of, which is actually Gowler's team, if people don't know, G3X, easily beat them. They play Death is Eternal, who, by the way, that's a team that's like, since the NOA used to go to California to boot camp, that's even a team they've played loads in scrims. They smashed them quite easily. It was a solid team, but it wasn't amazing. They beat the Call team on Nuke, destroyed them from T-side. They beat Karna, DSN's Big Rip. You'll have to wait till Fanatic a year or two later. It's what they were sort of saying there. In the lower bracket, they beat Gamer Core in a very close game on Mill. So there was 2 close Mill games, actually, that you could have absolutely lost if you were NOA here and had a much worse placing. But then in the final, you can see they had the super close first game on Inferno. This is the one off the top of my head where I think Valor dropped like a 30 bomb or something. But from what I remember, the first map was the one where NOA had 2 ridiculous 1v3s. They had one where Jaguar did it, it's in Final Reality 2, from the pit area of the A bomb site on Inferno, and then they had the one where Method was on like the triple boxes in the middle of the B bomb site and did it with like 1 health or something. These were 2 mental 1v3s that nicked the first map, and then NOA actually just smashed them. And the maddest thing is, on T side, this is all from memory, they even did something mental, like lost the pistol, but then did something insane, like did a pistol force on second, which wasn't a big thing back then. I think Element even had like a P250 or something insane, and they're all like one of those weirder guns, and he just got like 2 kills with it, and they actually like fucking turned the game, and they just rampaged the second map and shocked eyeballs and broke their hearts. So actually, in some ways, I don't even count this that much against NOA. It's not really a true loss. I would actually say, look, some of the games were close. Their opposition isn't the most insane, but it's still good. I do think it is a very good team in history. So I've got to say, for now, I think I am going to put that in A. Look, I am aware there's going to be way too many in A, and we're going to sort it out later. Some will get to go to S, some will go down to B. Right, then we have got, let me just check who this is down here. Let me see who I'm looking at on this first one down here. Right, this is actually Complexity when they won ESWC in 2005. So this was the lineup of Sunman, Storm, Trip, Warden, Fraud. Right, Sunman used to be one of the best like riflers and like land players in NA, even though funny enough he started with a reputation as an onliner because he used like interp and config settings, etc. But on LAN he was actually super clutch, famously from Zex, etc. and TSG. And I always thought in this team he was no longer in his like zenith as an individual player and fragger, but he still retained that clutch gene. So what he was really good at was he could have a bad game, but he'd just win you like a 1v2 or a big 1v1 at some point in the match. That's actually vital for teams like this, especially because Call for me was actually a slightly underskilled lineup. Their skill basically was massively in Fraud. He was the player they played around because he was one of the most dominant AWPers ever. Basically, the best AWPers ever in CS is like Fraud, Kogu, Delpan. That might even be it. I don't think I even need to go beyond 3. Marklov, there you go. Those 4 would probably be the best AWPers ever. Fraud was, at the time, absolutely smurf, maybe the best player in the world. Then you had Storm, who was a very skilled and quite good fragger as a rifler, but famously, they always say the lurk role was almost invented by him. He was more of a lurky type player. Trip was your IGL, and he took a lot from Hair, but he was quite an intelligent, cerebral in-game leader. Bizarrely, he could sometimes actually frag, even though he wasn't an insane player otherwise. Warden, for me, was like a Phil and more of like an entry type player who's willing to throw himself away like a soldier, but he had a really great like glue guy mentality. And yeah, the interesting thing also is people like Storm and Trip are a little bit quieter. Fraud's like a bit egotistical with a big mouth, but in a good way. He's your star player. Sunman and Warden are sort of more in the middle, and Warden's a more of a social guy anyway. I also thought it was just a really great blend. Like, wasn't too many egos, nice mix of tactics and team play, enough skill. So I always thought one of the all-time great teams. What they did, Call for me, is they showed NA how you were supposed to play CS and practice like pros, like Europeans, whereas Team 3D was the classic NA approach. You just stack all the best star players in one team over and over and over again, keep firing the worst one, or the one that's the least popular now, and just get a new star player and try and win by just shooting people in the head. Like, that'll only get you so far in the latter days of esports. So crucially, people like Team 3D, the only tournaments they won outside of NA were the World Cyber Games in Condition Zero. Actually, that's not even true. Condition Zero wasn't actually that World Cyber Games in America. I think it was actually. They won obviously the Source one that was in, I think it was in like an Asian country for that, wasn't it? In like Singapore or something for like the CPL 2005. So anyway, this was a big deal also to win what was at the time the biggest major, and it's in Europe. So for Call to win this was the big result. Now, the problem is the format's a bit scuffed back in the day for ESWC. So if we go down to here, you're going to see they lost the game in the group stage to Clan IT, which I think is Danish at this point in time. Let's go and have a look. It's going to be Danish or Norwegian. So where is Clan IT? I'm almost certain it's a Danish team anyway. So oh, there it is. Yeah. Oh, it's actually the team that later basically became NOA, if people don't know, because it got like MG and HPX. They obviously later played in the team that became NOA and then became MTW, etc. So some of those guys basically, by the way, he essentially was play against NOA, the Danish one later anyway, because some of them were in SK, like Zonic and Wimp, etc. So, They lost to the Clan IT team. Not terrible, by the way. You would expect like a second or third type team from Denmark or Sweden to always be an upset, potentially, even if you don't know them as well. These are all like known players around this era. And some of them went on to bigger things. Some of them didn't. They lost a game to them. Aside from that, you just beat all the no-name teams you don't care about. So nothing too crazy there. Second group stage, you are in actually one of the hardest. Because in theory, you've got Mousebots here who had actually won CPL Spain and were considered the number one team in the world at the time. And second at that tournament in CPL Spain was Complexity. So Mouse have beaten you. So it's actually a big deal to beat them. Existence is the Spanish team, which most famously had the player Musambani in it. Does it not have him on this lineup here? Yeah, whatever. Who I always thought was... Does it really not have the lineup listed here? Oh, there it is. There you go. I always thought this guy was he was kind of like an Oscar of the Spanish team. He was just a really skilled player. He was just stuck in Spain. They were notorious for upsets in European tournaments, though. So that's not like a team you can just look past. And then NIP, this is when they just had the breakup where some of the players went back to SK and made the team that won CPL Summer. And then they rebuilt around Valle, Zet and Inns, if you remember that lineup. So a solid team. It went on to be a decent team, but it wasn't like a true contender. But still, tricky group. You got through it quite easily. In the playoffs, you draw a good game, obviously a classic French team in the first round. Kind of wild you can even get them because they actually they got out of a group that had Team 3D in it, by the way. So you got them as the first opponent. That is actually one of the easier opponents. Admittedly, Clan IT is probably the easiest on paper or advanced online losers. But you got a good game. You easily took care of them, but not a very hard round of 8 opponent. In the semis, you play Lunatic High, who obviously then later in the same year went on at CPL Winter to be amazing, come second. They were just a strong team in terms of fragging. They weren't one of the best teams ever or anything. You beat them fairly easily on train. And then in the final, you played SK Denmark, crucially Denmark, because this is while they're still figuring out what becomes SK Sweden, and the NIP super teams failed, and they've made that pivot that I just told you about. So at the time, what they did was they picked up this set of players where a bunch of them had been in the Titans, but you don't have the IGL KK. You have people like Drally, Eugene, Wimp, and SPX had all been players. Spinks was the sixth man in the CPL stand-in for the Titans. And then what you did is you got Zonic, who was just a skilled player in the Danish scene at the time, wasn't the kind of role player he became later in MTW. You just had a really good lineup here. So they just had kind of a heater tournament and got to the final. You beat them in the final fairly comfortably. Now, the problem here is this, though. None of these are like all-time great teams, really. So you didn't really have to beat any like super elite team to win the tournament. In fact, the actual field isn't that crazy overall because you don't have like an SK Sweden. They don't exist at the time. And IP's just made this brand new lineup with players. At the time, nobody knew who the fuck Inns and Zet were, by the way. They were nobodies. Team 3D's got kind of a scuffed lineup because this is the one where since CBZ was mates with fucking K-Sharp in the previous year, done well in like TSG, he got to join this team briefly. This lineup just isn't very good. You'll notice there's no Rambo here. I think Rambo couldn't attend this event or something. This is before Shagwar had joined, or if they've got Method, but if Shagwar had joined, maybe he just couldn't attend. I don't know what it was, but this wasn't it as a lineup for me. I mean, where's the IGL for a start off? K-Sharp, by the way, it's 2005. This is the end of K-Sharp playing, if you don't know. He's just playing bloody MMORPGs all the time online. So the problem is the field just isn't that crazy. There's no gamer core. There's not even any Finns by the looks of it. There's a Four Kings, I guess. Unfortunately, this is, even though it was the major at the time, it's just not that crazy a major overall. But I do think it is a pretty good team, and I also was a fan of them as a team. So I think for now, I'll put them B for now, but I'm actually going to have to consider, someone's going to have to go C eventually. We'll put them B for now. The problem is the actual field isn't that crazy, but we'll figure all that out later. So then we have, I think this is Navi because it says 50. Oh no, this is going to be at Mibr. The reason I know that is because it's someone winning ESWC. I can tell by the check, and it says 52,000. And I think the Mibr 2006 ESWC win was the biggest prize money in history. So I think this is actually them. So let me see. And this was famously the only major any Brazilian team ever won, but it did put Brazil on the map. And crucially, their star player was Kogu, and he was fucking insane. So this is what, for me, is probably... Look, I guess I can't say it's the best Brazilian lineup ever, because on paper, the best Brazilian lineup ever is probably the 2016 one in CSGO, but this was a very good Brazilian lineup. Like, they also, by the way, in later years, fucked around and almost won like another major with like one player change or something. So, like, they obviously go out in bit one to be the IGL later. But in this era, you have, funnily enough, right... At the time, the biggest name, it's going to shock you, isn't Korgu or FNX. The biggest name actually is this player, Kiko, who was a player who was like a really skilled super aggro rifler who just had an enormous personality. He had incredible charisma. He was a really popular player at the time. Then you had Korgu, who'd come from G3X and was like a stud, clear generational talent, one of the best AWPers I've ever seen. Really is someone you just give the AWP every round and he'll just get it done. Unfucking believable. Like, he's so good. I have a frag movie from 1.6 that isn't even well edited, but it's just like 20 minutes of fucking Korgu clips, and it's fucking, even though a lot of them are HLTV, it's just so insane how good this guy was. He really is one of the best players ever. FNX at the time was very young, but he had a lot of the same problems he had later in life, which is that he was someone who was like super popular, but he was almost like the element of the Brazilian scene, which is funny because Element himself joined their team at one point in time and had issues himself with attitude. He was a guy where he was just really streaky. I mean, famously, he once just had a thing where he like, I think he had some shit where he like refused to attend an event or something, FNX, and he got in trouble and they kicked him out because he was just really young, but he was a really skilled player. Not like insanely, but like, I mean, here's the analogy I would give you. For me, FNX is a bit like, if you remember when Kirby was actually good in like Dignitas and then early Astralis, where he was like really streaky, his aim was up and down, but it could be really sick briefly, and he had like a super like swingy, shaky style of like fast aiming. FNX was like that, but he clearly had like swagger about him. Bruno was kind of like your fill player, was just like your solid, cool guy who just gets some kills. Nak was a really, really like good glue type character guy. I think maybe he was he even the IGL in this era? I'm not sure, but it was one of the better lineups actually. It was probably the best Brazilian lineup ever in 1.6. Pretty good. And the key thing about this tournament here is this. This is a pretty solid field of tournament teams, actually, because this is 2006. You still have the call lineup, the champions of the previous year. And right after this, by the way, they win that WSVG ISC tournament that I already said I didn't count as a major for this factor. You had this Jack's Money Crew team isn't bad, bear in mind it's basically a mixture of like other West Coast players with former Gamer core people. Lunatic High, obviously the previous year had come second at CPL Winter and had been top 4 at the previous ESWC. You have the real Fanatic lineups being made now with Fanatic and DSN and Khan, etc. They become very good at the end of the year, win a major. EG was just all right. NIP now, this is the following year when they've brought in Roban. So they're getting slightly better as a team, but they hadn't yet brought in Spawn, which is when they really went insane and became the team of the year. Spirit of Amiga's just good, but they haven't quite gotten to the sick lineups yet. This is just a solid lineup of some of the players from the previous year with Arcadian. Team 3D has Jaguar now and Rambo in the lineup again. They're good. They actually had a renaissance around this summer. They had like their WSVG Land War in America where they came, I think, second, was it? Did they come second behind Pandemic? I think something like that. WNV actually has already had the lineup that has won WEG Masters this year at the beginning and the end of last year. They'd won the third season of WEG. Yeah, he's just got a pretty good lineup of teams all in all. You actually have Pentagram, but this is before they made it the Golden Five. They had Motive, that's how you say that, instead of Cuban at the time. You had this pretty good Virtus Pro lineup that sadly never accomplished much with Lex, who at the time was like an unbelievable Russian player. It's actually a pretty strong field of teams. So if you go and look who they played, that's sad. It's one of those tournaments where they don't have the group stage. You know, when everyone goes, who's a moron, goes, anyone could just look it up. Oh, they have them here, actually. Fair enough. That's good. There are things you actually can't look up, though, believe it or not. Like sometimes someone doesn't even have a page. So group stage 1, let's see over here. So they had Lunatic High in their group and Pentagram, who isn't bad, by the way. They've already done some things, I think, like SEC, the Samsung European Championship. That's not bad. You did lose a game here. Oh, it looks like you drew a game. So let's see, where did you draw? You drew a game with the other best team in your group. It's not even the end of the world. Then in the second group stage, you get actually quite a hard one. You get quite a hard one because Fanatic was good. Astralis, this is even when I think they maybe have my mate Nato in the team at this point in time. Spirit of Amiga isn't even bad. If that's your worst team in your group, no wonder it's tricky. It looks like you lost a game here. Who did you lose to? You lost to Fanatic with Forrest when he's starting to come online as a fucking mega player. By the way, I disagree. I think 2007, 2008 is Forrest's best year. Khan actually thinks 2006. So then when you go to the playoffs, but you lost a map there. In the playoffs, you played Existence in the first round, so not that hard, to be fair. It's more of a surprise when you didn't even get that you win that easily. Playing alternate attacks and beating them in overtime on train in the semis doesn't sound that crazy until you know attacks was mega this year. This was the one where, right after this, Mouse just straight up signed 3 of their players, Tixo, Capio and Silver, to their squad. And then later, they took Capio and I think maybe Tixo and then like their fucking manager and went to like WSVG New York and won that and won like 50k. I didn't include that either as a major because that wasn't a yearly thing. It was just that 1 year. And yes, it was enormous, but because it didn't have the pedigree and you had to qualify into it from other events, I don't think it really fit the criteria of a major in the same way other tournaments did. So this was a very solid team. It was very strong this summer and onwards. And then in the final, you obviously played the Fanatic team, who was potentially ready to win. Any of these teams in the top 4, by the way, could have won this major. It was a very wide open one. So I think winning this one's actually pretty big. Yeah, you did lose a map earlier. That's not too good. And you drew a map. But I think this was pretty good all in all. Like, I already feel like that's a B at least. I do think that was actually a very skilled team too, though, so I'll reconsider that later. Right, who is this? Right, this looks like it could be MTW winning World Cyber Games. Let me have a look. No, this is actually the Golden Five winning their first major. This is them winning the World Cyber Games in 2006, which was held in Monza, Italy, at the Formula One track. So, obviously, I have a massive amount of respect for this lineup in general. So, this is the Golden Five. So it's obviously the team that had Neo was already clearly eye test, one of the best players in the world, unbelievably good. I even might argue I guess people say Zet was the best this year, so it's probably between him and Zet for me. Taz was a very good, like, aggressive T-side player, could be a good IGL, massive personality and shit talker, was the heart of the team. Luke was kind of your, like, third star. He was like an AWPer, but not like a dominant, like, primary carry AWPer type kind of guy, just use the AWP. He would even sometimes on T-side be the guy who watched the flank. Lord and Cuban were kind of your role players. Cuban would sometimes be the IGL and help with tactics and stuff, and would be like the guy throwing flashes and stuff. Lord did all the shit roles and was like the super support player back in the day when they forced people into that role. It's just, this team, because Neo was insane and Taz could be insane, they could have good skill level, but for me, this was more a team where it's a bit like a Spirit now. It's like you've got your stars that have to perform, then it's more like if everyone else does their job, you win off like team play and synergy and concepts like that. And obviously, actually, even back then, they never had the best tactics, but like VP, they had good tactics for them. That's the key thing. And they had amazing balls under pressure at majors. So I do think this is one of the best, like obviously this is like one of the 3 or 4 best lineups to ever play Counter-Strike, isn't it? It's fucking unreal, like their record. That's why they were called the Golden Five. So maybe they put the group stages up here again. Good, right, that's nice. So group stage, by the way, 2006 is one of the heydays of CS because it's before Source and CGS. Source came out in 2005, but it's before the CGS swap. So as a result, all the top teams in the world played. The prize money was still enormous in 2006. And this is fucking World Cyber Games. So if you go down, Pentagram was actually in a group where bizarrely, it was actually a team, Executioners, who I think's from like Singapore, fucking Indonesia or something, gets out in second instead of fucking Mibr. Is this real life? Or Emulate, the team that a year later wins World Cyber Games. That's fucking crazy. Let's just have a look at this Execute. Oh, they're from Indonesia. There you go. And you won all those games. Beating MIBR's legit. This is the year that they won fucking ESWC. I just showed you them. Emulate was already a fucking good team. Let's go. Where are they on here? Oh, they didn't finish top X. This is already the lineup that the next year wins World Cyber Games, by the way. So, okay. You get out of that group, beat everyone. In the playoffs, you play against an absolute shitter team. I think this team, no joke, is from something mental like Estonia. We're going to go look here. You're going to think I just looked this up earlier. I'm lying. I just have a memory like that. So, as you can see, only one player even has a fucking page. These guys are nobodies. So that's actually, by the way, one of the easiest round of 16 opponents you can get. I mean, for example, Mouse Sports is getting fucking Virtus Pro. Like, that's a hard matchup. WNV and Hacker PK. Hacker PK at this point in time is like solo them. This is the best Chinese team against the best Korean team in an era, by the way, when they can like win events and go deep in majors. This is really hard. So you got a very easy first opponent, and even then you have a close fucking first map with them. Holy moly. Then you play Hacker PK, Solo's team, in the next round of 8. You beat them easily. That's actually pretty big. I always thought they were a good team. Then you play NOA, but this is the Danish one with some of the players I've referred to earlier. You beat them close series, but you 2-0 them. on classic maps for the polls. Oh, by the way, shout out to, let's see, Jerky's Minion, resubscribed for 3 months, and JLCS2, resubscribed. Is that actually the real one? Is he trolling? Is that the real account? How do I even check something like that? Let me have a look here. What does it say in this message here? It says, when are the reflections coming out? Is his message when JLCS2 resubscribed. Apparently it actually is his account. The problem with that is, because GL isn't a very intelligent or articulate person, I can't even tell, does he mean as a joke, when is his reflections with me coming out as, and he wants to do reflections, or what is he referring to? I think that's what he means. I think what he means as a troll is like, lol, when are you doing reflection? By the way, we can do that. It's just we can't do it yet. The problem is you haven't done enough in your career yet, mate. Like, we could do it in like a year or so from now when you've got like a whole year under your belt. You've had a whole bunch of tournaments and ups and downs. I think the problem is it wouldn't really work as a reflections right now because you haven't played long enough. We need to have like a time to really talk about what you've done. So we could in theory do it, but the problem is no one knows who the fuck you are for the first few years. So I think it'd just be better to do that like next year or something like that. By the way, if you win the next major, maybe we could do it at that point. But yeah, maybe do it next year. Let's see. Then in the final, you have NIP. Now, this is why this particular pentagram placing might go, could even go all the way to S tier, I've got to say, because this actually is a fucking mega opponent to beat in the final. Like, if you know the way that esports history was at the time, and Pentagram was like solid, they wouldn't like the WSVG UK event or whatever, but they weren't supposed to be like the best team in the world. NIP was the best team in the world. This was the team of the year. This is a team that had won tons of tournaments. Zet and Spawn were fucking smurfing that year. Valley was good. It was a really fucking good lineup, boys. So on paper, NIP is supposed to win this in the same way as FaZe was supposed to win the Boston Major. So this was a massive shock. And if you see here, NIP wins the first map, 16-11. The second map, they lose close. The third map is a detail that a lot of people forget. This is the map, the third map, where Valley does the 1v5, where they go, this is sensational, from Tosh. But actually, Nip loses that map 16-3, believe it or not. The Poles smash the third map and steal, listen, not only a major, but a World Cyber Games gold medal from a top Swedish team that history says is supposed to win. I've heard that before. If you don't know, they did it 2 times later. They did it to Fanatic in 2009, same story. They did it to SK in 2011. That's just who the Poles were. So I actually think if you look who they beat here, Hacker PK, NOA, and Nip in best of 3, those are solid results. Hacker PK is probably like, you know, let's say they're like the 10th best team or something. NOA is probably like, I don't know, the 4th best team at this point in time. And NIP is the best team at this time. So that part is worth a lot. So I actually think I'm immediately going to put you... I think I might even put you S for this, but I'll think about this for later. I'll think about whether that needs to go down 1 or not. I could go to 8. I'll see about that. Oh, I've just realised. I've only done a couple, so it's all good. I keep forgetting to do the stats thing. So let's just rewind, right? We'll go back to where I had... Who was it I did? This one, it was Cole. When Cole won their major, ESWC 2005, Fraud was unsurprisingly the MVP. There's only one map missing. A look at his stats. Those are bonkers stats. And I can tell you, for that major, right, unsurprisingly, Fraud was insane. Actually, Trip really fragged out at this one in a way you wouldn't expect, because you think of him as an IGL as just more of a role player. Everyone did well at this one. They were all really actually high-level stats, I've got to say, for this one. And if you go and look when they played the best teams, like when they played SK, Sunman had a sick game in that one. When they played Lunatic, High Fraud went absolutely insane. When they played Mouse, Sunman was also insane along with Fraud. But then, yeah, it's actually quite a well spread out event. Then I also had... NOA that won CPL Winter. I keep getting tricked myself by that. So CPL Winter 2004 is Executor. Holy shit, if he had a 1.3 rating. I mean, he must have just rolled back the years on that one. Was just an amazing LAN player. Let me have a look for... That's actually one that I don't have the stats for, unfortunately. Who else was there? So there's that one. Then I've got Mibr winning in 2006. Going to be Korgu almost certainly, yes. Unsurprisingly, it's Korgu. Only 2 maps missing. One of the best players of all time. Like, legitimately a top 10 player. Maybe, probably can't be top 5 because people do want some more, like, resume stuff, but a top 10 player easily by body of work in 1.6 history. If I just look at ESWC 2006... That's not actually a surprise. He has the best stats. Then you've got people like Bruno, actually, who's more of a role player, had a very good tournament. FNX did well. This wasn't that crazy a fragging tournament, aside from Korgu, though. Interesting. I'll have a look at some of the... there was a lot of maps missing for this. There's 2 maps missing for this one. That is a downside. Was there anything else I missed here? I think I've just done everyone there. It's all good. Right, then we are going to go to Fanatic... And I'm going to guess, based on the jersey, because that's one of the earliest Fnatic jerseys, that they've won their first major, which was CPL Winter 2006, which was a very stacked event, but sadly it was the last real CPL, because after that, since they didn't pay out the prize money for this one, supposedly, teams just boycotted the next year and didn't attend. But this is where it's what's actually the original classic Fnatic lineup, which is that DSN and Khan, who played together for many years, got into a team that had Forrest and Tentpole, who'd played together in a Begrip lineup. Funnily enough, Khan and DSN played in a different Begrip lineup the year prior. And Forrest and Tentpole had won the second season of World Esports Masters. And then they had Archie, who was just like a Swedish player in the scene at the time. I think it was like an aggressive entry type player with an AK or something. And they had just like an interesting mix, like a classic Swedish mixture of like tactics, team play, not crazy tactics, basic ones, and then like a lot of skill. So in this lineup, Forrest is unreal. Like, he's already mega this year. He is one of the best players in the world. He's not as good as Neo, in my opinion, this year, but he is really good. Tentpole is a mega underrated player. He's almost like a Flosher type player, where he's got an all-around game. He's mega in clutches, just a really skilled player. My alarm just went off there, so I just realised I'll do like 10 minutes more. I just realised, wait a minute, am I ever going to finish this? How many more is there? I guess there's going to be another segment. Maybe it'll be tomorrow. All good. Actually, I'll keep going for now. Depends how I feel. Tentpole was a really skilled player and was like right up there. DSM was a star player at this point. If you don't know, he was one of the best AWPers in the world, and he was a dominant primary AWPer. It's only in years later, when they got Gux and Get Right into the team, that Khan and DSM sort of pivoted to being sort of supportive players, a bit like I always say Neo and Taz did in CSGO and Virtus Pro. Khan at the time was even a fragging IGL and was more of a loose style caller. And so yeah, actually the skill on this team is somewhat underrated. It wasn't a super team, but it has a nice mix of team play and good blend of personalities, and Forrest is emerging into one of the best players in the world. So at the time, Forrest and DSN, in fact, you could argue, if you did like a HLTV top 20, I think probably Tentpole, Forrest and DSN are all HLTV top 20 players. Forrest is definitely like a top 5. You might even argue this year, I'm not actually sure who it would have been. Maybe it would have even been DSN. For me, I always thought DSN was better than next year, but maybe he was this year. Who knows? I'll find out with some stats in a second. So I think a pretty good lineup. Better than the next year's, because the next year Tentpole left after this tournament, by the way, and they replaced him with Inns, the player from NIP, who was just like a good LAN player and a clutch player, but I never thought of him as a crazy fragger, so I thought they actually went team play over skill then, just like later when they had the dispute with Gux and he got kicked out, they took in Threat and went team play over skill in that case, but just wasn't as good a lineup, because team play doesn't always beat skill if you don't have quite enough skill. So this was a very stacked tournament, by the way, and a very interesting format, unlike other CPLs. It was actually, you can't even see it here because they don't even have it. Oh, they actually finally do have it. Right, let me just see if it'll load. Other CPLs were single map, double a limb. This CPL was like trying to copy ESWC type format and was like round robin group stage, 2 of them, 2 phases. And then you went into a single a limb bracket with best of 3. That's just ESWC. But admittedly, at least you're doing 16 teams instead of 8, which is ESWC. So what you did is CPL had already been sort of overtaken by ESWC as the big major. So they copied their format, but this was basically the end of CPL anyway, so who gives a shit? So if we go to the group stages, Fnatic is in this one with Riot Squad, but who are nobodies at this point in history. I think that's who that's supposed to be. Oh, it's R Sports, one of the two. And then these 2 teams didn't even turn up. So they just beat that team. They made you play all the rounds back then. And then you go, right, we're through to the next stage. Meanwhile, by the way, there were some other groups that were like, let's see. Yeah, actually, it's the next group that they get crazier in. In the second group stage, the issue here is this. Fnatic actually drew the group of death. That's what I was going to go to. So Fnatic is in an insane group here, where basically they have Team 3D. This is 2006 when Team 3D is still a fucking good team, by the way. Like, not elite, but they're like a top 8 team in the world. Like, they have the chance to be a dark horse. They're in your group. Zex, this isn't the era with Shag on them. They're nobody at this point, but they're still a Cal Invite level team. So let's say they're like, I don't know, 50th team in the world. And Call, this is 2006 when they won WSVG earlier on and be like a relevant team in most of the tournaments. Like, this in this group, you absolutely could get upset. You're in America as well. You could get upset by 3D and Call. This is a tough group, but you're 3-0 if you're Fnatic because you just smurf on them. Then you go to the playoffs. First round, you drew R Sports, which is like a North American team. Let's go and look. I think maybe, did they have like Garrett or something, like GRT or something? Who did they have in this team? They're not even on this first page. Let's go to this 16th. R Sports. Am I blind or something? I just can't see where this team is. Where is it? Top 16. Oh, there we go. It's because they didn't have the name. Right. This was it's basically, I've just realised, R Sports basically was Green Berets. This is just GB James's Green Berets team, basically. Like, Mailer was in that team, Pinecone, Lucky Tear. It's just basically Green Berets, who are like a low-level Cal Invite team who online could maybe sometimes be a dark horse, but aside from that, weren't a top team with top players. Like, they didn't even have GRT in this era. So that's actually a very easy team to crush. So they did essentially one of the easier opponents in the round of 16. By the way, remember, SK Gaming is getting fucking solos Project KR and losing to them. Team 3D asked to play Hacker Gaming, which I think this was the solo one. Or it's a Chinese one. It was the other one. This is the one that had Kings, if you remember. And ZY, the AWPer. 4 Kings themselves with Natu asked to play against 69N of Lurpus and them. Pandemic, arguably the best NA team, or second best NA team, has to play Pentagram. This is a pretty fucking easy first draw, but then the second you draw 69N. Interestingly, even though Lurpus's teams in history did match up well with the Fnatic teams won the matches basically all the time at the majors. At smaller tournaments, sometimes Lurpus and his boys would win over Forest and Khan. In the majors, it always went the way of Fnatic, and classically, the Finns always broke down. So even though they win the first map, they then just completely shit the bed on the next two. But that is a quality opponent to play. At the time, that team was like a top 5 team in the world, that Finnish team. The next year, they actually became briefly number 1 in the world when they got Natu in. In the semis, you played Pentagram, so already this run got way better. You had an insane second group stage. The first round wasn't that hard. You got a pretty solid, good, actually quite hard quarters. Semis, you've got a really hard one because this team just won World Cyber Games and WSVG UK, so this is now one of the best teams in the world. This was the real final because in the final you played MYM, but that isn't the Poles, that's Pentagram. This was Element's team with Real and those guys. It's where Element, right at the end of his career almost, when he's not putting in the hours, he joined up with this team, which was like all the young guys from Team 9 Norway, which the year earlier had won that CPL, which was Real himself, a generational talent, one of the most skilled players ever. PRB I always thought was pretty solid. The Zion guy was decent. Juvenile was just a journeyman, but like an all-round skill player. It was actually a pretty skilled team, but you can imagine they probably weren't doing like super in-depth tactics. Probably more just like element calling, going a lot off Real being a super stud. So I actually think the run is very legit. They easily beat them in the final. Like I said, the real final was this one, this very close semi, where absolutely could have been 3 maps. Maybe Pentagram even could have won. So winning this one was the first ever major. It was actually the first LAN, I believe, that this lineup ever won together. They'd had loads of times where they just come top 4 or second or third, and they kept getting beaten by NIP all year, who actually kind of did shitty at this event. And as you can see, they're not even here because they went out in the group stage. So it's a very stacked event as well. Oh, by the way, one detail I just realised makes the win over 69N not as impressive is this is the era when if you're 16, you can't attend CPL. So unfortunately, the second, in my opinion, the second or third best, it's between Conte and Narsu for third. Ruit's the best player in this team, but your third best player, one of your glue players, is Narsu, your all-round player, and he was too young to attend. So they had to take Barak, an old member from this lineup, and bring him, and they still had Tonpa because he was like the support player and they hadn't got Natu yet. So actually this lineup wasn't as crazy as it was in Europe when they had Narsu. So admittedly that takes it down a little bit, I guess, in terms of the run. But beating the Poles is very legit. Beating MYM's legit. The group stage was pretty legit. I do think this is one of the, if I'm talking best Swedish teams of all time, this is a top 10 one. I don't know. It's not the best Fnatic lineup for me. That would be 2009. I also thought it could have been one of the best, but they only got cooking at the end of the year. Then Tentpole left. So I don't know. I'm a bit torn on this one because it is a very good run. So I think I'm going to put it here for now. Like I said, there's going to be a lot A and B, and then we're going to sort them out later. Let's just go to Who was the MVP? We're going to guess Forest? It was. And that is an insane fucking number. By the way, look at Neo at WCG. Oh, did I not do Neo when they won WCG? Where was that one? Oh, I put them up there. Did I not actually... Let me go and double check. Did I do Neo? And if not, I'll do the WCG one quickly. Oh, I don't have the data for WCG. That's why, right? Okay. I don't have the data for all the events, by the way. So do we even have CPL? Oh, we don't. We just don't have it. Right. Okay. Well, anyway, it was Forest. Unsurprisingly, Forest was the MVP of a Fanatic lineup in 1.6. Then it is... I'm pretty sure that's the one I said I'm not going to include, but I accidentally put the image in. That is the Poles. I'm going to double check, but I'm almost sure that's the Poles winning the first IEM, which I already explained in the other episode why that doesn't get to count as a... Yes, it is. That doesn't get to count as a major for me. Then this is the Poles winning ESWC in... Is it 2007? Yes, it's the Poles winning ESWC, so their first ESWC. So obviously it's the exact same lineup you already know, because the Golden Five was the Golden Five. And this is the first one they won when they were Pentagram. Obviously, if you're following, I've just been doing these majors now. They had won World Cyber Games the previous year. Earlier this year, they'd won the IEM. I've just said I'm not counting as a major. They hadn't won CPL Winter, but they were basically the second best team there. They were a very, very good team. The problem they had was they could bomb medium-sized tournaments, but then they were unbelievably money at the majors. And especially, for some reason, they didn't seem to feel pressure in the same way as the top Swedish and Danish teams did. They tended to be sometimes a bit chalky unless playing against each other or Americans. So it's the classic Pentagram lineup. ESWC this year is a very stacked tournament. You've got, like, as I said, you have basically the returning champions Mibr, but with Bit instead of Kiko, because I think maybe Kiko would even retire at this point. Virtus Pro has brought in Edward. I think this is when they hadn't yet gotten Zaya, so they have Kalish, who was the guy from M19. It's an interesting mix. It's like a bunch of like star players, if you don't know. Like Lex was one of the best Russians. Romshka was a really skilled Russian player. Sally was that AWPer who famously beaten SK in 2004 at ESWC. This guy was the M19 best player. And Edward was obviously a stud from the Ukrainian scene. Hellraisers, blah, blah, blah. And later on went on to be an Arv. So a very skilled lineup on paper. You have not that great a Dig and Test lineup. Good games, just all right. Mouse Sports still has a very good lineup. It's just the problem was, on paper it was an amazing lineup, but this lineup never really worked in the server. Like I think it was Silver was really struggling. They could never get them to the same level. Some of them, they were in attacks. Like Capio was mega, Tixer was good. This lineup obviously was waiting. It took a while until they got God B and 6 in the next year. You had Fanatic has Inzin. They're obviously a very good team. Attacks rebuilt after those players went to Mouse, and they've got in Roman, who was unbelievable, and Pan and Aprox. That was an interesting roster. Nice mix of skill and tactics and team play. NOA is already cooking. Obviously, that was the roster that they brought in Sunder and became a very good team. They didn't yet have Wimp. This is when Sunder wasn't even the AWPer, HPX was. 69N is arguably the best team in the world at the time, actually, believe it or not, and they've won a whole bunch of lands. Turmoil's just a good NA team. Emulate, obviously later this year they win World Cyber Games, but this was around the time when they had the Game Goon run. They were already shown they were a skilled team. NIP has done the rebuild because some of their players went to SK, so they lost Robban and who else? Zet, because he obviously went to CGS. So they brought in Mini Valet, who was the brother of Valet, and they got in Face, who actually turned out to be an amazing player. Be Grip is Get Right in those guys. You have a different WNV. This is not actually the one with Jungle in. This is the other one, CN. You have Estro, who's mega. You have that H2K team that had come second at the IEM that I didn't count as a major. That was won by the Poles with Wimp and KK, some of the people, a couple of people who were obviously on the Titans. This is the lineup of Amazing Gaming. If people don't know that, later in the year steals the bronze medal away from Lopez. Just a really stacked tournament. So let's go to the group stage. In the group stage, the Poles had Virtus Pro, who's tough. I told you existence can be tricky. They beat them all. In the second group stage, they had, let me see, a reasonably tricky group because you have, in theory, the best team in the world. The Finns there, who at the time were really good. And you beat them. That's big. You had MYM, which should be the same Norwegian team, but I think at the time maybe Element, was he still in the lineup? Let's double check. Was he actually still playing for them at this time? He was still in the lineup, okay. But they've changed lineup though. You notice Zion's left and they brought in Nikon, who's a little bit washed at this time, I'm afraid to say. But that's already those are already two potentially tricky teams. Like you could lose to either of these two teams and not get out. And then TR Victory is like another Chinese team, but Chinese players often actually had quite good skill level because the PC cafes there were so shitty with the PCs. You'd often have to use a very small old school mouse pad and an old school mouse that was very cheap. So it meant that they had high sense and played with their wrist a lot like Quake players. So sometimes they had really snappy flick aim. So you win that one and get out of there. But as you can see, you did tie a game with the Chinese team on Dust 2. Then in the playoffs, you got NIP in the first round, right? That's not that crazy an NIP team. So smashing them, it's not even that crazy a team to play, and so smashing them's fine. I will say, for winning your group, like, there's much harder. I think almost every other matchup's harder. As I said, Fanatic's basically got the best team in the world at the time. MIBR's playing Attacks, who's a dangerous-ass team, and you could maybe argue NIP's better than Virtus Pro, but I'm not even sure. Virtus Pro's a pretty skilled lineup, like I said. So you got a fairly easy first-round opponent and clapped them. Then you got Fanatic. By the way, Fanatic was probably the team of the year in 2007 by the end of the year, but admittedly, this is one where you got them. They won the first map, you won the second two. Close series, good opponent to beat. In the final, you beat Away, who would also go on to be in the final of the World Cyber Games later this year, but this is when they were first coming online as an elite team. They've beaten the reigning champions of MIBR to get to this point. You beat them in 3 maps. The only map they won was a very close overtime session anyway. So pretty impressive, dominant run through the playoffs. So all in all, pretty good run, I've got to say. This has got to be this is when the polls were really cooking. This might actually be their best ever run. Like, that actually might even deserve to be S tier for now. And I'll decide later if someone gets bounced down. Right, for this tournament, Taz, I pointed this out to you earlier, but Taz got to be the MVP for this one, believe it or not. Admittedly, there's 5 whole maps missing, so that's not too crazy. Now, let me see, do I have any data on this one? Oh, I do. Awesome. Right, Taz actually had far and away the best stats, believe it or not. Like, he had almost a 0.96 KPR is bonkers. Neo, who was amazing, was 0.86, which normally, by the way, would be easily enough to get you an MVP, but Taz just smurfed this event. Amazingly, it's actually also, like, Cuban had a very good event at this one too, so fair play to him. And if you go and look at some of the opponents they played, when they played Edaway, obviously the key thing now is this is best of 3 in their single elim, whereas the earliest ESWCs were best of 1, just like CPL, so I also do give you more credit for winning a best of 3. In the final, it was people like Taz and Neo smurfing. Let's see. But then Cuban was also having massive games. Wow, actually, it's got to be one of the best fragging events that team's ever had. Maybe he does deserve to be S tier. Then we will go to... Right, just because of the flag, I can already tell who it is, because it's a French team winning a major, so it can only be Emulate winning World Cyber Games 2010. So if we go to that, by the way, one of the biggest shocks of all time, because this was a really fucking loaded major, and Emulate at the time was a solid team. I'll show you. They'd had this one run at Game Goon, which kind of showed they had potential. I did actually a really great written article on Fragbite about this team, if you don't know, where they had like a 12-month span or something, where they had these interesting results. So as you can see, they had... Am I thinking of Game Goon the next year? Did I get the wrong year for that? Surely not. No. Oh, it's because Game Goon was after this. Right, there you go. Oh, no, I'm right. I'm right. So I'm on World Cyber Games. That's all good. Right, I was right. So a few months earlier, so this is in October, 3 months earlier at Game Goon, this team had actually shocked everyone by making a run at a This wasn't normal Game Goon, 1 or 2 good. This was like all the best teams went to this one, and they came 3rd. And they actually did like a very shocking run where they were able to beat like 69N28E, the Finnish team. They were able to beat Fanatic. Narrowly lost to MIBR. In the lower bracket, narrowly lost to Fanatic. This is when MSX was absolutely smurfing. And spoiler, this tournament, where they win it now, he had one of the greatest individual performances ever in the history of Counter-Strike. He was fucking unbelievably good. So this lineup wasn't one of the best teams of all time. It wasn't even supposed to be that good. Like, realistically, this is just like a team with like a little bit of dark horse potential because of that Game Goon run. And it is, admittedly... World Cyber Games where you do get some upset potential. So in this lineup, you had Irek, who actually obviously is a guy I've even done a reflection with later, became a coach for like Titan. He was just like a cerebral type player, like a good team player for me. Rigo was like, I thought he was like all right, but I never thought his skills were that crazy. Hearts was like a mastermind IGL. I believe people even say Existence learned things from him. MSX was an unreal, every type of player, but he's amazing AWPer, hybrid. He was good with every weapon, really, really skilled. Matt for me was like, I'd imagine he was like a secondary caller. For me, he was like the second best player in this team. I always thought he was a good fragger, a good rifler. So it's a solid team, but it's mainly just MSX that's winning you it. So if you go look at this tournament, a mega stacked event, by the way. Remember, at this event, you've got like Pentagram, reigning ESWC and WCG champions. You've got NOA, who was just in the final of that ESWC. You've got Fanatic, who was actually one of the better teams in the world. You've got... It says Team Germany because it's WCG, but obviously this is like a mixture of mouse spots and attacks. Those are pretty skilled players, even though it's a mix. You've got MIBR, who has actually Gowlers in this era because this is when Kogu went to play in CGS. So you have like a scuffed G3X/MIBR mix, but still a solid team. You had Lopez's team, which was... basically 69 and 28E, like a very good lineup, but they were starting to fall off finally. You had the Koreans, who were still solid at this era, but the Miffy guy was a bit shit. And I was a fan of this He guy. MYM is still good, but as you can see, Element has left by now, so it's not as good a lineup anymore, so they're falling down in relevance. Amazing Gaming does go on to shockingly win bronze when no one gave a fuck about them at this point in time. Starix, Blade. This person is a commentator in CSGO. I can now tell you from learning a little bit of the Russian language, we've all been saying his name wrong. It isn't Zawok. That name actually is pronounced Chaos because the X is like, and then C is S in, what would you call it? Cyrillic. So that name is actually supposed to be said Chaos. That's how you're supposed to say that. Who else did you have? You had WNV, still a solid team, although admittedly this is not the one with Jungle, just a solid Chinese team. Four Kings wasn't that good at this point in time. EG's not that good at this point in time. Is there anyone else actually good I need to relevantly point out? Not really. Those are the top teams. But you can see you have a whole bunch just in this part here that could win the event. So in this tournament, you had... the group stage. I didn't actually know that they'd done this thing. That's quite a good feature. I thought that because there is a bunch of tournaments that sadly don't have any group stage information. So if you go to here, where the hell is Emulate? Right, they actually got not that hard a group. Their group has NOA, who's better than them. Then it has K23, who's good because they have a Dren, but they're not that insane. And then some of the rest, like Sequential Gaming, I think from like bloody like New Zealand or fucking Australia or something. So these teams were whatever. So you were always supposed to get out of this group. Apparently you lost a game. So who was it to? You lost narrowly to K23. Admittedly, a Dren could be amazing back then. He was a very good individual player. I will say one thing that contributed to this run was this group. This group of death fucked over Fanatic, one of the best teams in the world, because Eastro were actually a team that was quite canny at getting upset wins over Fanatic, and MIBR also is quite a lot of parity with Fanatic and playing up-tempo style with people like Kogu. So actually... sadly, if you're Fanatic, I think it was like a draw with MIBR or something. Yes, it was a draw with MIBR and Dust 2. That was one of the things that fucked you because it got you into a tiebreaker scenario. And then I think MIBR just won more rounds or something. So they got to go through. So you didn't have to have one of the best teams in the world go to the playoffs and play them there. So you get out of this group. I think there was maybe another one as well. Wasn't there one more result of a fucked up thing? No, that's okay for now. But then in the playoffs, you had... Lopez's team also then kick out the Pentagram, the Poles, who've won the last 2 or 3 majors, depending on how you want to count it. So that also helps if you emulate. You don't have to play them. Because if you go and look here, on paper, it's actually quite an even bracket. So the problem on your side of the bracket is you've drawn Team Germany. Skilled team, but not a real team. So, okay, you're supposed to win that potentially. Still touch and go because you're just a French team. Then in the quarters... you're probably going to play Eastro. Could be Eastro or MYM, both solid teams. But if you play them, they're a team that probably should beat you. And then in the semis, you're going to play Pentagram, and they're going to beat you and go to the gold medal game. But you're never going to have to play Pentagram because they actually get upset. And then the team that upset them get upset. So you can see, you can already tell I'm not going to put this as an S-tier team. Spoiler, it's probably going to be B-tier because they were just carried by MSX, and they didn't have to play that many good teams. So in your group, you played K23 and lost. So far, you haven't beaten anyone good. So in the first round, you play Germany, good players, but not a real team. You beat them, okay. Then you play Eastro. Eastro on paper, technically, he shouldn't even have been in this match, because here's a detail. When Eastro played MYM, they did something mental, like lose the series, then just say, hey, because remember, the World Cyber Games was run by Samsung and Korea, so there was insane bias to Koreans. They just said to the Korean admins, hey, they were doing that dock jumping / Russian walking where you tap the control, which at the time was controversial, and some tournaments said he couldn't abuse it. So they looked in the demo, and indeed, MYM was using the dock jumping. So they said, you have to replay the last map, and then this time Eastro won. Do you want to know the only problem with that? Is actually Eastro themselves were doing the dock jump in the game, but that's not what they were asked to do. It's like that thing in court where someone goes, did you say this? And you want to go, well, yeah, but he said this. And they go, sir, I asked you a yes or no question. I don't know if that's even real or if it's just in movies, but it's like that scenario where you get railroaded. So you can already say even that's a scoffed scenario. You're playing Eastro. Maybe you should have been playing MYM, but okay, you end up playing Eastro. You do beat them comfortably, but it's still a close series. Then in the semis, as I said, you would have gotten your biggest scalp hit if you'd have beat them, but you never got to play Pentagram. You played A Gaming, who at the time, no joke, everyone's whole thing was like, how the fuck has a Ukrainian team made semis? And then everyone's mind was blown when they won the bronze, even beating an American team. Because what was supposed to happen here was this. When Lurpis's team, who was really good this year, beats Pentagram in a close best of 3, that's like winning the tournament. So then they're supposed to beat A Gaming. They almost did. This one had an admin dispute on the last map too, where I've also heard Lurpis said something like, can you pause please, there's an issue. And the admin was like, sorry, I can't pause, even though that didn't make any sense and it made them like lose a round or something mental like that, or fuck up the buy or something insane. So that also is scoffed. You probably never should be playing A Games. So you've got basically the easiest possible semi-final opponent you could ever get in a World Cyber Games, it feels like. Except for insane years when the entire top half of the bracket just is shit. And even then, they could have beaten you 2-0. It's actually close over the first 2 maps against fucking A Gaming. There's no Markle on that team. There's no fucking Edward on that team. Their best player might actually have been Starix, for fuck's sake, or like Chaos or something. What are we talking about? So this isn't a very impressive run, I've got to say, boys. Then in the final, you get your one good win, which is this team was a good team anyway. They were obviously in a previous major fight. And the next year when they had WIMP, they become MTW, become the best team in the world, one of the best teams of all time. But they were a little bit chalky in finals. So that's a good scalp, but that's your only good scalp, mate. Like, that's a really good scalp. That's like an all right scalp. That's just a whatever, because it just wasn't a real team. It's World Cyber Games. So I've got to say, man alive, this was a fucking... You were walking on water. You had every fucking miracle happening for you now. I'm going to guess it has to be MSX. Come on. Look at that rating. That is fucking insane. Let me see. Have I got any stats for this one? Sadly, I don't for that tournament. That's a shame. Because I'd love to know, actually, how low were his teammates' frags. Might have some more of this delicious game of Supps. Not bad. I'm not even a Melon fan. Unless it comes to Kate Upton. That's actually a dated reference now. She's actually now like in her 30s and she's a mother and doesn't even do modelling anymore. My reference game is straight fire, but incredibly outdated. So it's all good. I just don't give a fuck about your Zoomer world. I've actually realised that alarm was supposed to be me stopping doing the fucking episode. How many more have I got? Right, I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to do 2 more. Actually, I realised I didn't even rank that. Where would that go? I think that's got to go C for now. You're not as unknown as M19, and you had some other results that were legit. You, even if you don't know, the next year ESWC had a mega fugazi one where like you almost like bullshitted, I think like the fucking polls or something insane and like could have been in the final. But that was also because of some French admin bullshit since it was on French soil, I think. Oh no, maybe that was actually, it was a French tournament in America in like San Jose or whatever. But I think you deserve C for that one. MSX was unreal. She didn't beat any good teams aside from that. Dr. Dre had NWA. DMX had the Rough Riders. And who is the crew holding me down, supporting me when necessary? It is, of course, my Patreon subscribers, the Skrilluminati. So this video, along with all the others on my channel, is kindly supported by Matt Pugnatio Rajcula, Animosity, Banediesel, Jasun, Jensen Goh, Tosh, Toucan, and you know who a special thanks goes out to because it's always my main man, Jerky's Minion. Do you want to ask a question for my video AMA? Do you want to find out who are going to be the guests on future interview episodes? Do you want to know who the guests are on my talk shows? Or maybe you'd like to suggest a topic or a guest. Perhaps you even want to take part in one of those lengthy, tailored to you discussions around esports that I do with the top tier donators. If any of those perks or others catch your fancy, then put your money where your mouth is, support me, and join the Skrill Illuminati today via the Patreon link where in the description box below.